So please raise your hands if you've ever received a shot at the doctor's office. Now imagine getting that shot at least 4 times a day. That is the reality for some people with type 1 diabetes. Monitoring glucose levels, injecting insulin, and many other things contribute to having type 1 diabetes. According to the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, there are around 1.25 million people in America living with type 1 diabetes, myself being one of those people. Of those 1.25 million people, 200,000 are less than 20 years old, and more than 1 million are adults. Around 40,000 people are diagnosed every year, and by the year 2050, it is expected that 5 million people will be living with type 1 diabetes. After my speech today, I hope you gain a better understanding of the different types of diabetes, everyday life with type 1 diabetes, and the complications of type 1 diabetes. I hope that my speech gives you knowledge that you can use in your everyday life about type 1 diabetes. Like I said, my 3 main points in my speech are the different types of diabetes that there are, everyday life with type 1 diabetes, and the complications of type 1 diabetes. So there are 3 main different types of diabetes, the first one being type 1 diabetes. So type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. It's when your immune system attacks and destroys beta cells in your pancreas by mistake. So by mistake, your body is attacking your pancreas thinking that it's an infection when it's really not. It is unclear what causes this attack, but it ultimately makes your pancreas stop working. In some cases, your pancreas will work a little bit. They call that a honeymoon phase of type 1 diabetes, when your pancreas works for a little while after you're diagnosed, and that just makes your insulin levels change, but ultimately your pancreas stops working altogether. A type 1 diabetic must administer their own insulin instead of their pancreas doing it for them. There's a number of different ways, including syringe shots, pen shots, and an insulin pump. An insulin pump is hooked onto you at all times throughout the day. It gives you continuous insulin throughout the day, and that's probably the closest thing to a artificial pancreas or something that functions as closely as your pancreas does. The next type is type 2 diabetes. Type 2, your body begins to use insulin inefficiently. It causes your pancreas to either produce more or less insulin. In most cases, it produces more insulin until it can no longer keep up. Unlike type 1 diabetes, a lot of contributing factors include like it coming from your parents, lack of exercise, and being overweight. A lot of the times it is passed down from family members, but lack of exercise and being overweight can be a contributor. Gestational diabetes is one that a lot of people have also heard of. It's caused by insulin blocking hormones, which are produced during pregnancy. The only people that can get gestational diabetes are pregnant women. Gestational diabetics usually have to watch their food intake, monitor blood sugars just like a regular diabetic, but in most cases they don't have to give themselves insulin. They just have to give themselves medication if their blood sugar levels do go too high. So my next topic is everyday life with type 1 diabetes. The first thing in an everyday life of a type 1 diabetic would be checking your blood sugar levels. Blood sugars are checked at least 4 times a day, usually before every meal and before bed. Blood sugars are checked with a glucose monitor, like the one in the picture. You take your glucose monitor, a small blood sample, which is commonly taken from your finger. Checking your blood sugar levels ensures that the other parts of your type 1 diabetes treatment are working, such as your insulin intake and your nutrition. The second main part of everyday life with type 1 diabetes is injecting insulin. Like I had said before, since the pancreas isn't working, you have to inject your own insulin instead of your pancreas doing it for you. A common way would be when you first are diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, using syringes and a bottle of insulin and measuring out yourself. The next step you usually move on to would be an insulin pen, where you dial the dosage that you need and it measures it for you. The third type, like I explained before, would be a insulin pump, like the one that I have. You wear it constantly and it gives you insulin throughout the day. That way you aren't having to administer shots throughout your day. The third part of type 1 diabetes would be nutrition, which is a big one. Checking your your intake and your sugar intake would be a big part of type 1 diabetes. Monitoring your sugar intake would let you know how much insulin you need to do throughout the day and whether you need to cut back or do more insulin throughout your day. The third part would be complications of type 1 diabetes. Many people don't know about a lot of these. The first one would be hypoglycemia. It develops when you've taken too much insulin and your blood sugar is low. It's broken up into mild, moderate, and severe hypoglycemia. Symptoms include sweating, confusion, slurred speech, and hunger. Some diabetics are able to recognize when they're having a low blood sugar, so this is easy to catch and easy to fix. Other diabetics, like young children, aren't able to catch their symptoms, and it's easy for them for their blood sugars to go very low and slip into a hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia can turn into a diabetic coma, and even some people have died from hypoglycemia. Some of the lowest blood sugars ever recorded from hypoglycemia have been around 4. A normal blood sugar is around 70 to 120. Diabetic ketoacidosis is usually the first sign of type 1 diabetes. It's when your blood sugar is very high, meaning you're not getting enough insulin. Common symptoms would be extreme thirst and extreme urination. Diabetic ketoacidosis can also lead to a diabetic coma. This is a little bit more common since it is the first signs of diabetes. Many people don't know that they have the diabetes, therefore they don't know how to treat it, and so it turns into a diabetic ketoacidosis. The last one would be diabetic nephropathy, and this is a kidney disease that some type 1 diabetics develop throughout their diabetes. It's when their type 1 diabetes is not under control. It leads to dialysis, and it sometimes even does lead to a kidney transplant. So just for my conclusion, there are 1.25 million Americans living with type 1 diabetes. There are 3 main types of diabetes: type 1, type 2, and gestational diabetes. Controlling diabetes has many factors, and complications of type 1 diabetes are not unlikely. So the next time you hear about type 1 diabetes, I hope that you can take the knowledge that I gave you guys and you can contribute to the conversation.